Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans, and I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 26 years, and I'll have something additional to say about that in a little bit. I started practicing during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a raging panic disorder that had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was on disability from work. I was unable to leave the house. And happened to get paired up with a psychologist who even back in the late 90s had been practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation for several decades. And this is what he offered me as a way of dealing with what I was going through. And I could not have been less impressed with his suggestion. My feeling was, dude, I can't work. I can't go out. I can't do anything. My life is stopped. And here's this guy talking about watching the breathing and stuff. I'm like, what the hell is all this? But it was all he gave me at first. And I figured, well, I'm sitting at home panicking all day anyway, not doing much of anything else. I'll give this a shot just so I can at least honestly go back to him and say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now, please? 26 years on, never had that conversation with him. And I'm still practicing. I'm teaching. My whole life has changed. And well, it's worked out pretty well so far. So I'm going to keep doing it a little while longer, I guess, and see what happens next. So that's what brings me here. And thank you for being with me today. Today's talk is the antidote to stress. And, well, I've certainly found for myself over the past 26 years that there are a lot of antidotes to stress. But we'll be talking about one in particular today. And what I'd like to do first is talk about exactly what it is that I mean by stress. All right. Might sound a little bit funny that we're going to say, well, what is stress? But we're going to start there. There's a critical distinction to stress that's very central to this practice. So we're going to start there, talk about what I mean by stress, as well as this initial disadvantage that we humans have when it comes to dealing with stress. We kind of start out life behind the 8 ball with this thing. And I'm going to get into that a little bit and then talk about this one particular antidote to stress that I have often overlooked but found very helpful. And then a little bit about how we can put it into place. So let me start with defining stress. Okay, you see these pictures of the Buddha behind me. The Buddha, the historical Buddha, 2,600 years ago, he spent 45 years of his life teaching us how to alleviate our suffering. Now, suffering's an interesting thing. We have a lot of baggage around the word suffering. We might think of suffering as being just pure, utter agony, like somebody's cut off our arm and we're just in excruciating pain, right? Or we might romanticize suffering. Oh, I suffer from my art. I've suffered for this. I've suffered for... Respect my suffering. I suffered for that, right? We can actually romanticize suffering. Now, there's an American monk named Thanissaro Bhikkhu who I study and quote quite often in these sessions. And one of the advantages of studying the work of an American monk is that not only is he able to translate the Buddhist teachings linguistically, but also culturally. So he doesn't talk about suffering very much. He uses the word stress. Because stress, well, nobody romanticizes stress. Give me my stress. That's my stress, right? We don't like stress. Stress doesn't have that connotation. And stress also gets across the point that it's not, oh my God, suffering that we're talking about here. The everyday stresses of life, that's stress. How do we alleviate that stuff? Sure, the big stuff too. But the little stuff counts. And in fact, in my experience, it's working with the little stuff that helps us work with the big stuff. So when we talk about stress, I want to be very clear, or suffering for that matter, whichever word you want to use. We're not talking about pain per se. Okay? The Buddha spent 45 years teaching us how to alleviate our own stress and suffering. Didn't say we're going to stop feeling pain. Pain and discomfort are things that are going to happen in this life. Stress, suffering, these are the things that arise when we do not deal with the pain and discomfort that is here skillfully. Okay? So I often like to say you can divide our lives into these two parts. You've got this first part of our lives, the first, 5 or 6 years, say, where we're encountering all these different kinds of pain and discomfort for the very first time. And as the Buddha said, when we encounter pain and discomfort, we have two reactions. One is bewilderment. The hell is this? And the second is a search for an escape. How do I get away from this? And we're, 3, 4, 5 years old. We don't know what the hell we're doing. We're just throwing shit against the wall, seeing what sticks, trying to find some strategy to alleviate this pain and discomfort. And at some point, we might find something. Perhaps something on our own, perhaps something that our parents, who also perhaps have not learned how to deal with pain and discomfort skillfully, might offer as a suggestion, like distracting us. Whoa, look at this bright, shiny object, right? And we might find something that works a little bit and say, oh, okay, this feels a little bit better. This is my strategy now, right? We don't think this consciously. We're 5, we're 6, we're just, I'm going to keep doing this. Well, is it necessarily the most skillful strategy that we have found? Usually not. But we hang on to it. That becomes our hammer. And now everything else better be a nail. So I like to say we can divide our lives into these two parts. Those first 2 years where we are developing these coping mechanisms for dealing with pain and discomfort. And then the rest of our lives where we are dealing with the fallout of using those exact coping mechanisms. The stress and suffering that are arising from using these strategies that maybe we've been hanging on to for decades. And that is what we are really doing in this practice. This is what the Buddha taught, was developing the clear seeing. So we can catch, here's how I'm getting in my own way. There's some pain and discomfort here. Don't have a choice about that. But what am I doing with it? Am I lumping stress and suffering on top of the pain and discomfort? Because that's on me. That's on me. Now, I mentioned we start off life kind of behind the 8 ball with stress. And what I mean by that is maybe some of you have heard about psychologists and research and so talk about this negativity bias that we have as humans. We tend to look on the downside of things. We tend to feel losses more acutely than gains. And this makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, right? Our ancestors out on the African savanna 50,000 years ago, well, the ones who had a negativity bias were more likely to survive, right? They're the ones looking for the threats, making sure we had enough food. Our ancestors who survived were the ones who approached life with a scarcity mindset. Do we have enough? It's never enough. And here we are. That's been passed on and passed on and passed on. And sometimes I like to say that we are the product of all of the generations of the most anxious people who have ever lived. And something that I've noticed for myself is this scarcity mindset isn't just something, say, with physical objects, but something that I've certainly worked with for myself over the years is being very concerned with whether other people are thinking of me in the way that I think they should be, right? Even if I suck at something, let's say I'm a 4 out of 10 at something, I'm okay with that but I'm not okay if somebody else thinks I'm a 2 out of 10, right? No, you better think I'm the actual, no, don't rip me off, right? Don't rip me off. And it comes from the same place, right? Again, think of the African savannah. There was a very deep fear there of being excommunicated from the tribe. If you were isolated, you were going to die. So this kind of mindset, generally speaking, for most of us, is no longer applicable in terms of survival. But these same feelings, these same patterns still get triggered. And in fact, sometimes we are triggering them ourselves just with the way we are thinking, the way we are using our mind. Again, how we're getting in our own way. Now, the Buddha offered many antidotes for stress and suffering. Practices of goodwill, compassion, breathing techniques. And there are a whole host of others that we can use that don't come under his teachings typically, like exercise, physical exercise. Great way to deal with stress, to work out some stress. But there's one that I historically tended to overlook, and largely for a specific reason, which I'll get to, which when I remember to use it, I find incredibly powerful. And I like to introduce it by way of this story. And this comes from Larry Rosenberg, who's the founder of the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center. This is a story of his that I read in a book he wrote, late 90s. And it's about Brooklyn meditation. Don't know if anybody's heard of Brooklyn meditation. A few of you might have who have been in some of my previous sessions. Brooklyn meditation. As the story goes, the student goes to the teacher and says, "This meditation stuff, this is cool and whatever. The breathing is really boring. Like, you tell me to watch the breathing, and the breathing's boring." My teacher says, "No problem. Do Brooklyn meditation." "Oh, what's Brooklyn meditation?" "Sit and do your practice, but pinch your nose." "Oh, okay." Student sits and pinches his nose, opens his mouth. No. Close your mouth. Student sits, pinches his nose, closes his mouth, sits there. 20 seconds, 25 seconds, 30 seconds, starts shaking a little bit. Finally, whoa! Right? Can't take it anymore. Starts gasping. And teacher says, "Now is the breathing boring?" There are two reasons I bring this up. One is because of what we feel in that moment that we get the breath back in. Relief, for sure. But the one that I'm really driving at today is gratitude, right? Thank God. We go from this not having enough air, scarcity mindset, to, well, suddenly there's an abundance, right? Because there's air everywhere. But the other reason I bring it up, not just the gratitude, but the importance of our perception. Because what's really changed here? Our perception of the breathing's the breathing. The air's the air. What's changed? Our perception of the breathing, our perception of the air, our perception of scarcity and abundance. It is really, really hard, in my experience, to simultaneously hold the stress of a scarcity mindset and gratitude. It is really hard for me to hold those both at the same time. And this is the reason, in fact, why when the Buddha would teach, you may have heard a lot of things about Buddhism. Like I mentioned earlier, we're talking about, suffering. You may have heard about things like not self. You may have heard about things like emptiness and nirvana and all that. This is not what he started with. when he taught, he started by teaching about generosity. That was where he started. He started with generosity. Generosity is pretty damn incompatible with a scarcity mindset. If you're being generous with something, then by definition, you have more than enough of it. And it doesn't have to be, money or whatever. Like the generosity of offering goodwill. So I have found that cultivating gratitude really undercuts stress. But I myself, and this may resonate with some of you, I found some challenges with this, which is one of the reasons it's not the first thing I think of. Historically, when I think of something like this, my first thought, especially early on, was like, I don't want to practice gratitude. I don't want to. I'd rather grouse about shit. And isn't that an interesting pattern to notice? Why would we rather, and I'll speak for myself, why would I rather grouse about shit than practice gratitude, than feel gratitude? Well, I know where this comes from for me. As I mentioned, I fell ass backwards into this practice because of anxiety and depression and panic disorder that left me housebound. Well, I didn't become housebound overnight. It took me 8 years to finally bottom out. And my strategies, again, my unskillful strategies for dealing with anxiety and panic and so forth were things like denial and distraction. And how did I distract myself? Using anger. Grousing about shit became my shield. So again, like I was saying before about this first and second part of our lives, and of course I wasn't 5 or 6 at this point when I started using this strategy. I was like 18. But again, what coping mechanisms are we using and then clinging to that are causing so many more problems than the initial whatever it was in the first place? But because it felt a little bit better at one point, well, that's our hammer, and everything else better be a nail. So why was I clinging to anger, which itself is stressful, suffering? Why am I clinging to that? Well, it was my defense against anxiety. So that's one of the things that I came to see in this practice, developing that clear seeing of like, oh, wow, I'd rather do that than that. And why the hell would I? Oh, that's why. And that's what I've been doing. And how's that working out for me? Oh, kind of sucks. Kind of sucks. And I can really see why I had this aversion, if you will, to cultivating gratitude. Because what does anger typically include but a feeling of self-righteousness? Really incompatible with gratitude. Really incompatible with gratitude. Which means that practicing gratitude doesn't just alleviate the kind of stress we might be thinking of in terms of daily stress. Really, in my experience, undercuts anger too. But there are also other ways where we might have difficulty cultivating gratitude, in the sense that perhaps we've been told that we should feel grateful for things because other people don't have them. I like to call that gratitude by guilt. I mean, there are worse things you could do, I suppose. And I'm not saying that such a situation isn't necessarily true, but I've never found that to be the most skillful way to cultivate gratitude. So I want to talk a little bit about, well, what I've done. Okay? Because we can practice gratitude for other people's kindnesses and so forth. But sometimes we need to be a little bit more creative. We need to exercise that gratitude muscle a little more creatively, because we might be having some of those kinds of resistance I was mentioning a moment ago. And this is where we really concentrate on our perception, like I was talking about earlier with the Brooklyn meditation, right? I've had this interesting thing happening for the past couple of weeks. So for the past, I don't know, like 10 years or so, I have been flirting with pre-diabetes. So my doctor every year is like, yeah, you're kind of on that hairy edge there, right? And it ticked up a little bit higher again this year. I got my results a few weeks ago, ticked up a little bit higher again. I was like, all right, let me start making some dietary changes. And about 2.5 weeks ago, I dramatically reduced my sugar intake, my carbs intake. I've never eaten so many seeds and nuts in my life. Luckily, I like seeds and nuts and fish and avocados, which are also on the list. So it's worked out pretty well so far. I'm doing all right. Interesting side effect I've noticed. God damn, has my sleep gotten deep. Really deep sleep. Like, I've typically always slept pretty well, but I mean like insanely deep sleep. And one of the interesting side effects that I've noticed is I've been having nightmares. I don't usually have nightmares. Not like the most horrific nightmares, but still enough. I'm just like, wow, this is really interesting. But it's always made me think of this thing I heard years ago, which is it's better to have bad dreams than good dreams. Because when you wake up from a bad dream, right? You wake up from a good dream, you're like, ah. You wake up from a bad dream, you're like, ah. Interesting perception. Right? There's this gratitude. Oh, so that horrible thing's not happening. Oh, okay. Here's a way I've been working with it lately. It wouldn't be necessarily uncommon for me to have an hour of my life during any typical weekday go something like this. My day job is in IT. Okay? So I could be getting in some cage match with a computer at work, getting annoyed with the stupid machine. Arguing with that for a while, getting pissed off, right? Then I could drive home, and as is somewhat often the case, I get in my truck and maybe I go to plug in my phone and use Waze, and the USB port craps out. Happens. And then I get home and I walk in and one of the cats is horked all over the floor. Happens. A whole sequence of events in a short period of time that are pretty damn annoying and kind of piling up on each other, right? I've started shifting my perception a bit and saying, well, what do I have to have? What's a requirement in order for me to be getting annoyed at work? I have a job. Haven't always had a job. What's the requirement for the USB port to crap out in my truck? Well, I gotta have a truck. Didn't always have a truck. There's cat yak all over my floor at home. I have a home. Fortunately, I've always had a home. I also have to have a cat. We have many cats. I've had to live without cats. Didn't like it. I have a cat. Right? Perspective shift. But we can take that to another level. Not just gratitude for the things, because, well, as I've just mentioned, the things sometimes will be here, sometimes they won't be here. But we can take that to the next level where we can have gratitude for our ability to work with our perception. We have a mind we can work with. We have a mind that we can shape. And in fact, this was the one thing that the Buddha said was really actually ours. Our actions and intentions. And intention is just a form of action. It's very interesting to note, and some of you have heard this in my sessions on karma, the 3 pillars of karma: intention, attention, wait for it, perception. perception, how we are using our perception. And our karma is made up of the results of our past intentions and actions, our current intentions and actions themselves, and the results of our current intentions and actions. The most important of the three is our current actions and intentions. That's the most important. Karma is very much a here and now kind of thing. We have the ability to work with our perception in the here and now to affect what kind of experience, what kind of karmic experience we are having. And here's the thing, we are always using some form of intention. We are always using some form of attention, and we are always using some form of perception. We are always shaping our experience in some way. Always. What varies is how skillfully we're doing it. How skillfully we are using our intention, our attention, our perception. Are we bringing our mindfulness to bear? And again, as I always like to say, mindfulness doesn't mean awareness. We hear that a lot. The Buddha did not teach mindfulness as being awareness. Awareness is awareness, what the Buddha called alertness. Mindfulness is a function of memory. It is what we are holding in mind. What we have done in the past that was skillful, so we can apply that to what we are doing now. So as part of our practice, we can have gratitude for this practice. You better believe I have gratitude for this practice, okay? I mentioned at the beginning that I would have something additional to say about how I've been doing this for 26 years now. And that something additional is that I got up this morning, saw the date, and realized, oh, holy shit. It was 26 years ago this morning that I hit bottom. It was the day that I went to work and drove into work, took off my coat, sat down, realized I am not going to make it through this day. And got right back up, put on my coat, and drove back home. Had to have one of the most difficult conversations of my life with my boss. And so started my journey. So I have a tremendous gratitude for this practice, for the fact that I've stuck with this practice, for the people who have helped me along in this practice, for everyone who's been part of this journey so far, including all of you here today. I have gratitude for all of you. And I hope that you each have gratitude for yourselves for doing this. This is part of your karma. You had an intention to come here today, to pay attention, and to work with your perception. This is your karmic experience. So make sure to include yourself in your garden of gratitude that you are cultivating. So I managed to get through that and only go a few minutes over with the talk. Shall we practice with our perception a bit? Have a sitting? And then we'll open it up for some discussion and Q&A afterwards. Okay? I always like to begin my sitting by imagining I'm suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head. As a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. And this is the part where I always say that if there is some tension here, physical tension, mental tension, emotional tension, that's completely fine. Tension is part of life sometimes. And I have typically found that my biggest problems with tension are not the experience of tension itself, but the storyline, the mindset that the experience of tension should not be here. Especially if we're meditating, right? Oh, I'm supposed to be meditating. I'm supposed to be calm. I'm supposed to... Not supposed to be tension here. And so we might try to force that tension away. And there's our hammer and nail problem again. Trying to force things away. What is force? Another form of tension, isn't it? So we're trying to get rid of tension by bringing more tension to it. And as I say, I always mention this at the beginning of my guided sittings. And we can swap the word stress in place of tension, can't we? The same way Tanasaru Bhikkhu uses the word stress instead of suffering so often. If there is some stress here, mental stress, emotional stress, physical stress, combination, we can notice what that experience is like. You're allowed to inquire, investigate the experience of stress. You are allowed to do that. As I said, we are developing clear seeing, not for its own sake, but so that we can start to see how we're getting in our own way. Very often, one of the ways we get in our own way is by shooting first and asking questions later. So we try to fix something when we don't even see if it's actually broken. May end up causing more problems with how we are approaching tension, stress, pain, discomfort, maybe anxiety and panic. May end up causing bigger problems with how we are approaching them than they ever were in the first place. So I offer you a few moments of getting that lay of the land, just seeing what's here. It doesn't matter so much what it is. What matters is that we are just seeing it. And that can also include your thoughts and feelings about what you find here, because those are things that are also here. And it's often helpful to have a vantage point, an anchor from which to watch what is here. And we do not have to engage in Brooklyn meditation. We can come to our breathing and watch how it is too. We can shape and control our breathing in this practice. Absolutely can. You do not have to. And I usually do not. Not consciously, anyway. I simply watch the breathing as it is. The body knows how to breathe on its own. We can have gratitude for that, by the way, because how long would we last otherwise? You can watch the body breathe. See how it feels. And we might cultivate the perception of giving to the practice. We so often enter things with the mindset of, what am I going to get out of it? What am I doing this for? What if we come at it with the mindset of, what can I give to it? Now, I often say that these practices of mindfulness and insight meditation will give you everything if you ask nothing of them. That's exactly what I mean by this. If we come at it from that scarcity mindset, I want to get this, I want to get that, I want to get that. What do we do the whole time we're practicing? Looking to see if we're getting it yet. And what does that do? Get in the way of ever getting it. What can we give to the practice? What can we offer? And see what we get in return. Maybe today, maybe not. But at some point, have to. Again, that's the nature of karma. It's cause and effect. We're making a change to what we're doing, including how we are using our perception. Well, we got where we are today based on what we were doing before. We're going to get where we're going based on what we're doing now. What can we give to the practice? Even if that's just giving it the space to be whatever it is. Maybe we feel like we don't know what the hell we're doing here. That's okay. We can be with that. We can observe that. We can breathe with that. It's allowed. That's one of the things I have gratitude for in this practice. Nothing's not allowed to come up. I mean, for someone who's spent almost 10 years hypervigilantly trying to keep certain things from coming up in his mind and body, it's a goddamn relief to be able to say, no. Anything can come up. It didn't happen overnight. I had to work to get to that, But again, it's like that coming out of Brooklyn meditation, that relief, that gratitude. See if you might have some gratitude for how the body is breathing. You might not. I'm not saying you should. Again, this isn't gratitude by guilt. Just saying, inquire. You might find that. You might find something else. I don't know. Your practice. Half the time, I don't know what I'm going to find. Certainly can't tell you what you're going to find. The point is the inquiry. One of the uses of perception that Tanasaru Bhikkhu offers fairly often, particularly when talking about physical pain and discomfort, is imagining that you're riding in a car or a bus, but you're facing the back. So rather than seeing what is coming up as the vehicle's moving forward, you're seeing what you've passed. You're seeing the things as they're fading away into the distance. So the pain or discomfort that you might be experiencing is leaving. Not saying there isn't still pain and discomfort here, but the pain and discomfort that you've experienced is moving away from you. You're never going to experience that moment of pain and discomfort again. That's gone. You're through it. If the mind starts to wander, and it will, mine too. Remember, we're having an intention here to stay with our anchor, our breathing. And our attention will sometimes get pulled away by that, by the thinking, feeling, perhaps a bodily sensation. And at some point, there's a perception that that has happened. Like, oh, I lost the breathing again. And, well, how do we handle that? That's a form of pain and discomfort for some of us. Oh, geez, I lost the breathing. I'm terrible at this. I'm never going to, this horrible person. Interesting perceptions. We could also use the perception that we've just developed our practice a little bit more by catching that we have fallen away from the breathing and have an opportunity to come back to it. Same exact event of losing the breathing. Two very different perceptions, two very different ways of handling it, approaching it. You have to ask which one is more skillful. When the Buddha talked about skillfulness, he meant, is this increasing or decreasing stress and suffering? So which way of dealing with losing the breathing is less stressful? Badgering ourselves about it? Or saying, oh, look, I lost the breathing, but I caught that. and now I'm coming back. That's not getting in the way of our practice. That is the practice. The way we do anything is the way we do everything. Classic spiritual saying. Which means how we approach this practice in itself probably reflects the way we're approaching most other things in our lives too. If we're impatient with ourselves, in general, that's going to show up here. That's not getting in the way of the practice. It's what we came to see. Oh, here's how I'm getting in my own way. Here's how I'm causing myself stress. What might I try to get different results? This is our practice ground. It's our training camp. Then we take what we develop here and we take it out into the world. And our world off the cushion, also becomes our training camp. There's no distinction between the two. This is a living practice in every sense of the word. I'll mention one other unlikely, surprising place that I've found gratitude in my practice. I always imagine all the different voices inside of me as being like at this big round table, right? This big conference table. You got one voice saying, we got to do this, and we got to do that. And some of these voices are diametrically opposed to each other. Each quite convinced that they're correct and telling me, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that. And it's up to me to sort this all out, right? But here's the thing is, every voice at that inner round table is us. They're all just coming from, different vantage points. They have different perceptions, limited perceptions. So sometimes there's this voice that's like, you got to be doing that. And you're thinking, no. That's not, no. I know that's not skillful. I know that's not helpful. I know that's not right. Why does this voice keep coming up? God damn it, right? Stop. But at one point I said, what if I just, I don't have to do what this voice says. What if I just listen to it though? Let it state its case. I mean, that's really what it wants, is to be heard. You show up to a meeting every day and they don't let you talk, and you have something that you feel is very important to say, you're going to start trying to talk louder and louder, right? And what I came to realize, not surprisingly, is some of the loudest and most irrational voices were pretty inevitably and invariably coming from not just a limited vantage point, but one that was filled with fear. And as someone who has done a lot of work with fear, I felt tremendous compassion for those voices and what they're going through. But what really surprised me was what came on the heels of that compassion, which was gratitude. Thank you for trying to help. I mean, I'm not going to do what you're saying because I know from my greater vantage point, it's, that's not the way to go. But you're trying to help. And again, shoot first, ask questions later. You never see that. You never get to experience that. What happens if you put the gun down? Just start asking some questions. No, talk to me. Right? Oh. You're scared. I'm terrified. Oh. And you're trying to help. That eased a lot of stress. It was skillful. And that becomes part of my mindfulness practice, holding that in mind. Oh, that's something I did that was skillful. So I will close our sitting portion with a short piece from the monk I've been mentioning several times today, Thanissaro Bhikkhu. He said, as the Buddha noted, the practice of concentration centers on the power of perception. Training in gratitude shows how powerful perception can be, for it requires developing a particular set of perceptions about life and the world. Gratitude also requires mindfulness, in the Buddha's original sense of the word as keeping something in mind. In fact, the connection between these two qualities extends to language itself. In Pali, the word for gratitude literally means to have a sense of what was done. The Buddha defines mindfulness as remembering and able to call to mind even things that were done and said long ago. Our parents' instructions to us when they were children, to remember the kindnesses of others, are among our first lessons in mindfulness. As we develop our sense of gratitude, we get Thank you, everybody. So we can get to my favorite part of this, hearing what's on your mind. Any questions, thoughts, observations, things that might have popped up for you. Hey, Kathleen. Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
This is the first time I've joined you.
Welcome.
And I just want to say that I got one takeaway from this today, which to me is huge. I've always had a problem with the term suffering. Because I don't suffer. People in the world suffer, but I'm pretty much okay. But when when the word stress is substituted, everything makes a lot more sense to me. So thank you.
Cheers for that. Yeah. And you are not the first person I've heard say that. That's something that I've seen come up in other writings as well, where people say, yeah, I don't, what is this suffer? I don't suffer. Do you have stress? Oh yeah, I got stress. Yeah. And that again is where that sort of cultural divide comes. I mean, it's so challenging. These teachings are 2,600 years old from the other side of this mud ball we're all trying to occupy together, right? So they've gone through so many interpretations, and that's also part of the reason why I study Theravada Buddhism, which is just the teachings of the historical Buddha as best we know them, right? Because there's so many different sects, and you can get into all kinds of, whatever. I'm really just interested in what the guy said, as best we can know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, those of you who have been with me for a while know I always say I'm very left-brained. I'm very analytical, organizational, pragmatic. And that's one of the reasons that the practice and the teachings resonate with me so much, is the Buddha himself was like incredibly pragmatic. This is a very mundane practice. There's no magic here, all right? It's just exercise your intention, your attention, your perception, looking at what you're doing with what's here, and choosing the best option available. That was one of my early, when I started pulling myself out of bottom 26 years ago today. That was one of the things that got me through, is saying, well, the ideal option is not on the table right now. The ideal option was having my life back and not being riddled with anxiety and panic. That option wasn't on the table. What option was on the table? Well, I picked these very small things, like maybe walking around the block of my house so I could start getting out of the house. That was all I could handle, right? Very pragmatic, very mundane, and just maintaining persistence with it. And that's all I've done for 26 years now. That's it. But yeah, it can be challenging if we're losing something in the translation, to your point. And that's why I really, I prefer the word stress to suffering as well. We have a real connotation with stress that's very different from the one from suffering. So I'm glad that landed for you and
It did.
helped shift your perception. Yeah. Sounds like you really took something important away from today, which is great.
I feel like that I did, yes.
Awesome. Cheers. Thank you for that. Linda, did I see you had a hand a moment ago? Yeah.
Mostly I have a comment because you have really changed my life. I have to say that hearing your words and the way that you phrase things, it's understandable to me. I couldn't do it reading the books that I read and doing that. And so I just want to say, first of all, congratulations. What an amazing accomplishment on your anniversary of this 26 years. That's been incredible. But also my gratitude, I'm overwhelmed by the fact that I don't know how you came into my life, but I just know I want to keep you here. And so that's what I just wanted to say. I just think you're great, and I just appreciate it. And it does work, and it is consistent. That's the whole key. It doesn't happen overnight, but all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, why do I feel okay today? I don't have that, and I believe that this is all part of it. And so I really wanted to just express that, especially, now and here. So congratulations.
Thank you for that. It is one of the funny things about doing this, any practice really, but doing this persistently and consistently, is that at some point we do end up realizing that there's been a significant shift. And when we have that realization, or at least I'll speak for myself. When I have that realization, and the times that I've had that realization, my first thought is, but I haven't changed anything, right? Because I've just been doing the practice. It's become just what I do. So I feel like I haven't actually done anything. One of the funny effects that I've talked about, and it's very germane to what I was talking about earlier, using anger as a shield against anxiety and panic for all those years. I started to develop an anger management problem because of it, right? And again, it goes back to that whole thing of, we're creating more problems based on our coping mechanisms, right? So I had an anxiety and panic issue. Now I have an anger management problem because of my coping mechanism for dealing with it, right? And what was fascinating was I never really specifically worked with anger in my practice, partially because it wasn't crippling like the anxiety and so forth, but also because, well, it didn't feel like such a big problem because it wasn't as painful, or wasn't as obviously painful as anxiety and panic. So I never really specifically worked on it, but I worked the hell out of anxiety and panic, right? And then noticed it was only in retrospect after a number of years that I looked back and realized, wow, I rarely get angry anymore. And when I do, it dissipates really quickly. And kind of dawned on me, I was like, well, what have I been practicing with anxiety and panic for all these years? I've been practicing noticing the bodily sensations, the emotions, the mind states, and how they all play off of each other, taking them apart, noticing each one, giving them some space, not blindly obeying their directives. So I've been practicing all of this with these powerful destructive states, potentially destructive states, right? Well, what's anger? All the same shit. So of course, it would have the same sort of effect, right? Or like I always say, if you've been swimming for 10 years and then you want to take up jogging, you don't have to develop the stamina for jogging from square one. You have it from the swimming. It translates, it generalizes. So that is one of the funny effects is you might look back at one point and say, oh, wow, there's been a hell of a shift. Why? I haven't changed anything. It's one of those nice road stops on the journey. Yeah. So I'm glad you've experienced that, and I'm honored to be part of that journey and experience that you've had.
And the funny thing is, you brought in a thing about your pre-diabetes, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to buy avocados, I'm getting more nuts. It's really great that you come up with examples that are nothing to do with meditation, but they're impacting on other people's lives. And I can certainly, benefit from that too. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. I gotta tell you, for anyone who's curious, if you try reducing your sugar intake, like my body's been calmer. Huh. My body's been calmer. Yeah, like I'm fortunate in that I'm not huge on sugar. I really could give a shit about pasta. A lot of these things you're not supposed to, I'm not really interested in. The things that are good, I happen to really like. I like nuts. I like seeds. I like fish. I like avocado. I like, yeah, sure, I can do this, So I'm very fortunate in that sense. So it hasn't been like particularly difficult. The research has been a little difficult in that there's just carbs and sugar hiding in goddamn everything. That's been challenging. So trying to find the things that are actually okay, that's a challenge. But the actual, doing it itself is like, that's been fine. But the effects have been profound. It's been 2.5 weeks. And just the way I feel, and again, the sleep has just been insane. So it's really, if anyone's curious about that sort of thing, and if you're curious about what I've been doing, it's off the topic for today, of course, but, I'm just here sharing my life experience. So if you want to drop me a line, you have my contact information. So if you want to drop me a line and ask me about that shit instead of meditation, you're welcome to do that too. I'm just sharing whatever I got, whatever you find helpful, take the best and leave the rest. So.
You are the best. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, really.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you again. Cheers.
Ron, this is the first time that I've met with you virtually or at all.
Welcome.
And hi, yes, thank you. It's good to be here. And I have to say that I have been working on various practices since having, various things in my life and realizing that some things were no longer working. So I was like, okay, it's time to make some changes. And just some of the things you said were it was like an aha moment. Like I know I'm a very impatient person. So it was kind of like, ooh, I'm causing myself suffering and I'm getting in the way of myself. And I was like, whoa, that is so not what I'm trying to do. And to what Kathleen was saying earlier about, I never considered myself to be suffering in any way, shape, or form. but yet I find that I'm either always anxious or stressed. So I'm like, huh, what do you know? And just the fact of what the practice of this Buddhism appears to be, that I'm like, huh, I need to look into this a little bit further. Something that I can really relate to, as I was not brought up typically, in with this type of a spirituality. So it was one of those like, this is very exciting for me, and I plan on sticking around for more. So I thank you. I thank you. And with your experience with sugar and the lack thereof, I have also had that experience, and it's exceptionally difficult to find foods that are low, if not, do not have any sugar or carbs. So I feel you there.
Yeah, and if you'd like, feel free to drop me a line with whatever you've found. So, because I'm
Oh, yes.
always open to, because I found some stuff we can maybe compare notes. Because
Got it.
yeah,
Got it. Absolutely.
yeah,
Okay, we'll do.
please, yeah, cheers. Glad to have you with us, and glad that today has resonated for you. It was a funny thing for me. The psychologist who got me started on this practice never said anything about Buddhism. I was working with him. I felt the pieces on April 20th of 1998. Started meeting with him the next day, and then we worked together pretty intensely through about the end of that year. And I continued to see him for on and off after that for a bit. But at the end of the year, when I had started getting back to work again, and he said, "Oh, go, check out this book." And I think it was probably the same book where I got the Brooklyn Meditation bit from Larry Rosenberg. And he's like, pick this up and read it. You'll know when the time is right. I'm like, okay. And I don't know, maybe a few weeks later, I grabbed it off Amazon. Amazon was still, I think at that point, only selling books and CDs. Okay. This was back then. And got a copy of the book and start reading it. And he keeps talking about the Buddha. I'm like, why does he keep talking about the Buddha? And, and so finally I go over and I went on the computer and I started up this newfangled search engine called Google that had just came out, and put in Buddhism, and I start reading it, and I start seeing all the stuff I've been doing for the past 9 months. My girlfriend back then, wife now, my girlfriend at the time, comes up behind me. He's look at the monitor. She's like, Buddhism. She says, who's a Buddhist? I look up at her. I say, I think I am. At that point, I still thought Buddha was the fat guy, right? So that was kind of my introduction to realizing, oh, interesting. And
right.
That's where it all kind of started. I'm like, oh, yeah. So,
interesting. Super interesting.
So I'm glad this sparked an interest for you.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect, and it was just kind of like, all right, I need to get a practice in that's like for me and have my like specific me time. And I was like, I'll go with this, because at the time it was raining and super miserable outside, and now the sun is shining. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. So yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank
Cheers.
you.
I'm glad you had such a good experience. And by the way, I'm a wicked type A person, so I get the impatience thing. One thing I'll offer you, I could go on for 8 hours about the impatience thing. You can probably tell just the way I talk, the way I act. I mean, I'm like very type A. But one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard, and I keep in my back pocket, comes from one of my current yoga teachers, who says the only thing you need to have patience for is impatience. If you can be patient with your impatience, what else is there? It kind of undercuts everything else. So
it does.
Something with no carbs and sugar for you to chew on for a bit.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Cheers. Good to have you with us.
Can I jump in?
Please do. How's it going, John?
All right. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Ron, you reminded me of some pretty foundational stuff. Just, it's a practice. It's a aspirational goal. Like, if you're getting mad at yourself for not hitting it out of the park, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, right? And the framing of kind of what you were talking about, I'm going to continue to use that moving forward in a lot of my high stress situations, because sometimes it's like, oh, geez, I have this problem, but it's like I'm lucky to have what I have, and so thank you for the reframe.
Cheers, and thank you for that. Yes, I will say that some of my most profound insights in this practice have come in the middle of very stressful situations. That's out in the wild. That's when the shit's really hitting the fan. That's what better opportunity do we have to see how we might be getting in our own way than when we're in the thick of getting in our own way. And that's kind of one of the funny things, one of the ways that we actually get in the way of our own practice is, again, we sit down on the proverbial cushion and feel like, well, I'm supposed to be calm and serene. Like, okay. Like, first off, I've never found a better way not to feel calm and serene than to be trying to feel calm and serene. But even beyond that, I mean, the practice really is so that we can not be thrown off balance in those times when things are not calm and serene. So calmness and serenity, these are things that the Buddha talks about a lot. But again, perception, this is the way I think of them. I think of them as side effects, not goals. If I am engaging in the practice the right way, they can't help but not arise. They have to arise at some point. But they're not going to arise by me saying, is it here yet? Is it here yet? Is it here yet? So a lot of my really most profound insights have come in those moments when I have been in the middle of some kind of happy horseshit, maybe at work, maybe out on the road, or what have you. But because I have spent the time, because I have persistently and consistently engaged with the practice on the cushion and off the cushion, those habits, those tendencies, those have become the default now. So when the shit hits the fan, it just automatically kicks in, and I'm in a better place to have that clear seeing of what I'm doing with what's here now in real time, even though when what's here now is fucking mayhem. That's a really valuable skill to develop, because we can't, by definition, we can't bottle that. We can't say, okay, I'm gonna have utter mayhem right now. By definition, if it's got to be, how am I going to deal with an uncontrolled situation, which by definition we cannot create and prepare, and we can't control. So, yeah, I really like what you said about that. And I'm glad you were able to have that kind of experience today. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I apologize. There's like a saw or something going on outside the window, so I don't want that to disrupt the calmness and serenity of this conversation. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for that. Cheers. And yeah, some of when we practice at the library, as again, we will be back in a couple of weeks. The doors are open in the room that we practice in. Sometimes we hear noise out in the hall. And one of the things that I say is, hey, notice what comes up when there's noise out there. Is this throwing you off balance? Are you requiring to have complete and utter silence for your sitting? Because life is noisy. And if noise is going to throw you off balance, it's something we want to see. That's not getting in the way of our practice. It's what we came to see. I came to see how are we working with that.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Thank you, everybody. It's great to have you here today. And I hope to see you all again real soon. Have a great rest of your day and weekend, everyone. Cheers.